My name is Vlad. I'm an ML scientist at Bayer Pharma, and today I'm going to talk about how we use knowledge graphs, and in particular, how we build machine learning methods and AI solutions on top of these knowledge graphs for early target discovery. So I will briefly talk about drug discovery because I actually forgot that the audience is life science. I mean, I'm sure most of you know that drug discovery and development are slow and costly. Most of the costs and most of the time is spent on development. However, discovery is also something that we cannot neglect. In particular, target identification is something that takes also a couple years. And this is something that we want to accelerate, whether with the use of AI or not. So disease prioritization and target discovery are the earliest, let's say, stages of drug discovery. And here it may be obvious, but the first question is kind of a strategic question. What are areas of unmet medical need? What diseases do we want to focus on? And increasingly, not only in oncology, we are thinking about what subtypes of the disease we want to focus on and not just, let's say, disease in general. And after that, so having determined what we want to treat, we want to ask a question: what genes are relevant for this subtype? What can we do to reverse the disease or improve the outcomes? And as you all know, discovering novel biological targets is challenging because already a lot of things have been discovered, and biology is quite complex. And also you have to go in the discovery pipeline from basically from in vitro models to human populations. And sometimes you don't have human data. Well, most of the time you don't. If we want to focus on target discovery, what are the stages within target discovery? Well, as a whole, there are three major ones. Let's say it's hypothesis generations, where you usually generate ideas from scientific literature or in-house experiments. Target candidate prioritization is followed up on that. So there you rank your ideas and collect feedback from your peers. And maybe the most difficult stage is target validation, where you actually need to perform experiments and you need to validate these hypotheses. So as a whole, even though this is represented as a pipeline, target discovery is not a standardized process. It's not something that you can just put in a funnel and it goes as an assembly line. However, certain stages do include some routine tasks, so you can automate some of them to some extent. Just a brief list of considerations of what makes a good target. So you really need to consider from molecular evidence and all the way to human data. You need to establish a mechanistic gene-disease link. You need to have supporting experimental evidence in cellular and animal models, potentially also evidence in human data if there is, and consider druggability and so on. I'm sure most of you know this already. That's why let's move on. So how do we use AI/ML for target discovery? So this is going to be also a bit of an introduction. I wanted to first start what are areas in which I think AI and ML excels at. I think there are, well, roughly 4 areas, let's say. The first one is really pattern recognition in high-dimensional data. So if you have a very high-dimensional data set, such as gene expression data, you can easily cluster it, you can find patterns in it. You can also visualize it or sort of summarize it in a much richer way, in a much richer representation that is also accessible to humans. You can also integrate data, so this can be also achieved with knowledge graphs, but also when we think about different modalities such as text, images, NGS data, and so on, you can also integrate it using machine learning. Well, maybe more of a classical example is the supervised learning, where you want to classify things or do regression, or increasingly now, of course, since 4 or 5 years, generative modeling, where you can generate images, text, and structures of proteins. Maybe also kind of an opinion where I think AI/ML struggles still. It's really de novo knowledge generation. So where sometimes people ask us, like, can you just generate this data using a machine learning model? Can you train a digital twin model? I think this is something that we cannot do yet. Our machine learning models do need data, and I think it's important to set realistic expectations. And this is maybe why, as Alexander mentioned, some of the projects will also fail because some of the expectations were just too high. Also, when we have sparse data, it's not guaranteed that machine learning will work. You either need to use a simple model because you just don't have enough data, or you risk overfitting it. And in general, maybe this is more related to de novo knowledge generation, but when you have nested questions and you actually need to do a lot of experiments, this is something that's not going to work out. So just reflecting on what stages of target discovery can be or are amenable to a certain extent to automation, we think that first of all, knowledge aggregation, where you want to integrate data from literature, omics studies, internal and external database is something that can be achieved. Also literature mining or data mining in general, analytics and insights, and maybe to a lesser extent within target validation, the only thing that you can do, in my opinion, is develop project-specific ML models. So if you have some experimental assay and you want to, let's say, interpolate or stuff like that, or impute data, or just analyze the data in the first place. So this is something that you can come up with, but I think target validation is something where AI/ML still kind of struggles to make impact, even though it is a very important stage. So this is just a just a very simple schematic of how biomedical knowledge graph could look like. Of course, we have genes, compounds, pathways, phenotypes, and diseases, this graphic illustrates that in a knowledge graph we really capture many scales, so also molecular evidence, but also can include disease subpopulations. And maybe the highest impact of this is that we aggregate knowledge across various data sources, modalities, experimental assays, and really biological subdomains, something that may be obvious when you just work with this, but it's also not trivial that you can achieve this with that. With that, I think knowledge graph is just by itself is a data structure, is a data resource, but how can you best harness this wealth of data? And here, in the talk, I will talk about two things, maybe knowledge graph reasoning and also kind of retrieval using AI approaches. So let's start with this question. So when we think about data mining or just like data retrieval, we want to probably, we can just retrieve everything, right? But in a sense, when we query something, when we ask a question, we want to get the most relevant answers first. And this is already achieved in, let's say, in a Google search. When you search something, the results are not random. So it's not just alphabetically sorted or so on. In the earliest version of Google, they used PageRank, which Alexander also mentioned. It's a graph algorithm. Nowadays, they probably don't use it anymore, only as a sub-process. So when we think about ranking the results, this is already achieved under the hood most of the time. And we don't think about it so much, but the same issue probably exists in graphs. Not always to the same extent, but it depends on the size of the graph that you're dealing with, and also, let's say, average node degree. But you do also need to sometimes rank evidence in knowledge graphs as well. If you have a million scale graph, and if each, let's say, disease has potentially thousands or hundreds of thousands of connections, then you do need to also make sure that you want to consider the first most relevant connections. And here, the idea is to use machine learning methods, for instance, such as knowledge graph reasoning. So what exactly is knowledge graph reasoning? Let me explain. So if we, all right, does this work? If we just focus on the middle panel, what the idea is, this is not always an embedding-based approach, but very commonly we can embed a graph as in the embedding space. So what that means is that each node or each entity will get its own embedding. And so we can also embed the relations. Why is this useful? If you have vector representations, just as for text, you can also search the graph using these embeddings, for instance, or you can also make certain predictions because now you have actual numerical values. So it's not just text. For machines, you do need to have some numerical representations, and you can do something like link prediction because you can define a scoring function that combines, let's say, vectors of certain entities. And this question of whether a gene is connected to a certain phenotype can be formulated using these embeddings. So link prediction is one application or like one manifestation of knowledge graph reasoning. The other one is actually evidence ranking. So once you have the scores for predicting links, if you interpret them as evidence, or like as how likely it is that there is a link between a pair of entities, then you can also use this for a ranking evidence. So I will talk about also whether it's always, let's say, a clear one-to-one relationship. Like if something is good at link prediction, is it good at evidence ranking? I will briefly comment on that as well. So maybe just to illustrate or make it more concrete, maybe it was already evident. So this is something that used to be used in recommender systems when you have users and items. And you can also think of it as a bipartite graph with the existing connections, let's say, being transactions, and you want to predict what are the future transactions. So what you would do is train a model, and this would also implicitly rank the existing connections or the existing transactions, and then also predict the unknown one or the future transactions. And in the same vein, you can do something similar for any pair of entities in the graph, be it gene-disease pairs or gene-phenotype pairs, and so on. As I mentioned, the idea here is not only to predict novel links, this is interesting for sure, but also maybe to rank the existing relations already, because it's not always clear how to rank things. So as I mentioned before, we do want to prioritize target candidates. And if you don't have a quantitative score, then it's very hard to do that when you have thousands of candidates. Or hundreds. So maybe this is the most interesting slide for you, or with some results. Oh, sorry. So the question is, how do we actually evaluate these reasoning models? So one axis is, or like one dimension is obviously machine learning evaluation, where you stratify your graph into train, validation, and test data. You train your model, and then you actually see what comes out on the validation or test set. Here we use the metric called hit at k, which on the held out data checks the proportion at which an existing link occurs among the top, let's say 10, top 20 predictions. So here we did an internal evaluation of different machine learning models, and here I'm just talking about let's say the broad classes of models that we used. Three major ones were embedding based, so just really like embedding lookup. The second class was a graph neural network, and the third one is a transformer or a graph transformer. So what we found was it seems like a transformer model really performs the best in this evaluation. Embedding-based approaches are, let's say, second best, and I would say they are good enough in most cases, because transformer models also need more time to train. And what we also found is that actually the scores that you get from transformer reasoning models were not always aligned with let's say, with the intuition of what is important for certain diseases. And here, simple embedding-based approaches were actually better at ranking evidence. One of the limitations, let's say, for a transformer model was really that they were good at predicting only the high degree nodes. So if you have a hub, like a gene that is connected to many things, then it will be easier to predict these kind of links and, let's say, upvote the evidence for that. But for, let's say, medium degree nodes, it was actually rather difficult. And maybe importantly also, we did an evaluation of whether let's say, if you take the top 100 genes or whatever, top 200 genes, for each disease, are these more likely to make it past a certain preclinical stage? And here we also, you always need to compare with something. So the baseline here was, for instance, the differentially expressed genes from these diseases, or also gene-disease pairs with high citation count from the literature. So we found that the best approach was really using these knowledge graph reasoning models. The second was with high citation count. And then the third one, the last one was actually the differential expression analysis results. I don't know. It's a sharp transition. Maybe I missed the slide, but all right. So you can also maybe this just illustrates how this would be used and the idea of ranking. So if you want to use knowledge graph reasoning in practice, and for instance, if you approach a disease for which you want to generate a list of candidates that you want to screen, for instance. Let's say a data-driven, unbiased manner to do this is to consider the graph data and use the knowledge graph reasoning scores to choose the top, let's say, and top 500 genes, and then maybe screen them in an in vitro screen, for instance, and then check for evidence in that disease. The second part of my talk is about AI-based knowledge retrieval. So Alexander already talked about retrieval augmented generation. That's why I'm not going to talk about this so much. I think one thing that I want to stress about it, there is an argument that GraphRAG is better just because graphs are structured and text is not. I think it is part of it, but I think to maybe elaborate on this, it's also the retrieval process itself that is more exact and has some guarantees, right? Because if you think about RAG, you need to go through millions of documents and which are chunked. If it's a vector search, you need to think about, in the embedding space, you need to match to the query and see like what is similar enough to that, what is relevant enough. So things can go wrong here quite easily. And for example, with AD being an acronym for many different things, whereas in GraphRAG you also traverse maybe millions of nodes, but then it is much more clearer where you check for the nodes that you found, whether there is a connection or not, and you also check whether it's actually a disease node, for instance, and not, let's say, some kind of computer science concept. And you can also do it for any kind of modalities, but most commonly it is done, of course, for text, images, and graphs. So at Bayer, we develop more of a hybrid approach where we do both literature and GraphRAG for target discovery. We use both literature RAG and GraphRAG, and here this is primarily used for evidence search, data aggregation, with the outputs being certain reports. So for example, target discovery reports on a certain target, so kind of a deep dive. So the advantage of this is that the workflow provides references to both scientific publications and knowledge graph data. Well, since it's a graph event, I think maybe to talk about what are the, let's say, flavors of GraphRAG that we use. So under the hood, so to speak, we use either MCP servers or there is another alternative approach where we use where we have LLM make direct Cypher queries. So in general, one note, evaluation of these approaches is actually not straightforward because they are quite open-ended. It's always kind of case by case. And aside from that, I don't think there is like a consensus on how to evaluate these things. So internally, we use retrieval metrics, so how precise, how much recall there is. Also, output variability. If something changes all the time, then probably also not very good. And also token efficiency, because that incurs costs. Maybe another consideration. So aside from let's say from evaluating things objectively, is also how to even package this, how to implement this. So I mean, traditionally we would have, let's say 4 years ago, we would have thought of this as just let's say a Python workflow, a Python program. It doesn't have to be a Python, any other language. But in this program, you maybe have some fixed context, you append user input, and then you process it. Maybe you make APIs to LLM and so on. So it's a program that is very structured, that has a controlled flow, right? So you always have to think about like, what do I want to do? How exactly does it have to work? What are the use cases? What are the failure modes and so on? And something that has become maybe more possible in the last 2 years is also have purely LLM-based workflows, where you no longer have actually just a big Python script or a collection of scripts, but you can have a collection of markdown files and have LLM basically execute many tasks, including this, with set context user input, and then have sub-agent calls to process these inputs and also access the tools. Sorry, that's to access the tools and so on. So this is something that we've been also pondering, like what is the better implementation here? There are some pros and cons, obviously, with the Python workflow. I mean, it's the, let's say, the traditional approach. It is a semi-deterministic. It is more robust because you have a control flow. You can also have basically error handling and so on, which is, yeah, which makes it more robust, but it is less flexible because you need to determine exactly what what needs to happen. And it's maybe harder to adapt to a new use case, right? So once you have, let's say, a Python script or a collection of scripts, you need to rewrite it for sometimes major parts of it for a different task, or like for even for a slightly different task. Whereas for LLM-based workflows, it is much more flexible because LLMs can also just learn from the context that is given, which could be user input. So in this case, it is more flexible, it is open-ended, but of course less reproducible and potentially less robust. So one thing, of course, that we're also doing, I'm briefly mentioning this, is combining GraphRAG and also knowledge graph reasoning. So how does this, what is the crossover here? As you may know, you can extract concepts from the scientific literature, extract relations from the literature, and ingest them. Well, at the surface level, you can just use RAG and just have your LLM basically rank the evidence for certain relations, right? You can say, okay, strong evidence because it occurred in 2 abstracts or in 2 papers. So that's how it would work if you don't have a graph, right? If you just have an LLM and have literature RAG, this is what you could do. The alternative to that, or maybe first the problem, is that we found that these evidence scores are not very reliable. I mean, first of all, nobody trusts the LLM scores, but also they tend to be quite inflated. Just because something occurred in a paper doesn't mean that this should work. So what we came up with is also just this approach to always ingest the relations from the literature into the knowledge graph and use a model, a machine learning model that is trained on the graph to rank these literature mined relations, which results in these evidence scores which are probabilistic. Again, to stakeholders, it might be also not always as transparent. However, these scores are much more, let's say, nuanced. And they have actual quantitative basis because LLMs may be good at language, but they are not always good at sort of ranking things on a scale from 0 to 5 even. I think I'm out of time, so maybe this is really the last. This is the last slide. Just a bit of self-reflection, like what are the common roadblocks to AI adoption, and I think the major ones are really like lack of transparency, maybe a bit of a domain gap. And a bit of a cognitive overload. I mean, there are some mitigation strategies that are proposed. Yes, I think we can discuss this in the panel section. Thanks a lot.